intracellular communication, especially in order to exchange material and to also actuate different cells at a certain distance in the body. So as you I just use the pointer here. So as you saw here, the number of publications is really exploding for 10 years now, starting in 2012, about EV implication in a lot of pathology and also about EV characterization. So EV are involved in cell-to-cell communication, as I was saying just before. They are also really interesting because they can be used as therapeutic and regenerative molecules and vesicles objects in order to try to make a repair of tissue and also to deliver specific drugs that are put inside. So they are also involved in disease prognosis because if they are clearly identified and characterized, they can be used in order to detect and to diagnose different pathologies. So for all that reason, it's interesting to try to characterize them and to detect them, but the main problem is that among this number of different objects, EVs, they are belonging to small, medium, or large EVs, and they are overlapping in terms of size and density, while their function is not at all the same. So the main question is to try to provide techniques or combination of techniques that enable to characterize their cell origin, their size, and also the concentration. So there are a lot of techniques already used to try to characterize those EV, but especially techniques in solution. And in that techniques in solution, you find different approach using nanoparticle tracking analysis, flow cytometry, and even mass spectrometry. But if you take them alone, you can reach a certain phenotype, a certain molecular profile, or a certain size, or a certain concentration. But any techniques is able to give in at once concentration, size, and phenotype while we are looking for that in order to characterize them. You can also use different techniques involving a substrate, like for AFM, as an example, in order to characterize them. So, of course, you have electron microscopy that enables to show that what you are working on are indeed vesicles. You can even label them with specific nanoparticles. You can also use AFM, and as an example here, in order to obtain morphology, size, SPL, like I will show you just a bit later, and fluorescence. But again, you can reach phenotype or concentration, size, but no techniques enabling you to have all that information at once on the same sample on the same substrate. So the real challenge now is to try to provide a complete characterization of them, and ideally, if it's possible, to make it in crude sample with containing those contaminating biological objects with no labeling, and with the objective to get a complete and global EV subpopulation characterization. That would be really cool, and it's not so easy, and it's for sure needing to combine technologies. And ideally, if we can make it in physiological condition, to keep them spherical, and in order to eventually recover them after the characterization, this would be even better. So what we propose in the group is to combine IFM to other techniques. This combination, we call it the Nanobionistical Platform. And so in this approach, what we propose is to combine IFM with surface plasmon resonance using a chip in which you graft different ligands. I will present you just in a few slides how we make it. And using this functionalized chip, it's possible then to capture different subset of EVs on the chip. And this chip is then going under an IFM tip in order to get in a classical imaging mode, in contact or quantitative imaging mode, characterization in terms of size, morphology, and then you can get for each subset of EV captured on each ligand a certain profile in terms of size, morphology, especially of EVs. We also combine this approach on the same substrate with mass spectrometry in order to get a proteomic profile of the different subsets. And in this paper, we combine it with Raman spectroscopy to get even a molecular profile of each that subset. Then the advantages of this nano-bioanalytical platform, including AFM, is to provide a relatively complete view of EV subsets on crude sample because we use the functional chip, and as a label-free method because those 3 and even 4 different techniques don't use any label for characterization. So of course, to validate that platform, we needed to develop and to calibrate it. So to develop calibration particles, biomimetics or synthetics one. So I won't go into details for that, but we can of course exchange about that calibration particles if somebody is interested in that. So the idea was to cover all the range in size of the extracellular vesicles. And then we determined that depending on the size of that different calibration particles, we managed to get a dynamic range from 10 to the power 7 to 10 to the power 9. For the extracellular vesicles derived from platelets that we on which we worked a lot during the last years, we managed to establish a dynamic range from 10 to the power 6 to 10 to the power 9. So the cornerstone of our NBA platform is a chip, and this chip facilities, people use it as a naked board just to add some vesicle, or we functionalize it to graft with thiolates in order to graft directly vesicles or to graft antibodies or ligands in order to get subset possibility to get subset population of EVs. So in each spots, you get different potential ligand, and on each of the ligand, you will have this capture. We can tune the number of spots and the density of the antibody inside the spots. We use for that a spotter to just deposit different arrays. And then on this gold chip, we can envision different characterization. So in the paper, what we propose as a method is to use that biochip, either naked or thiolates functionalized with a mixture of thiolates and MHDA, that is a carboxylic acid group at the end. So it's possible then to activate it in order to graft through 3 lysines, amino groups, the different vesicles or proteins if we use antibodies. Then we go as a second step for ligand grafting in arrays or full coverage of the chip with a certain material, EVs or antibodies. We of course had to optimize the condition of grafting depending on the pH and the cell condition. We then insert this biochip that was prepared into the machine. So we use SPRI system from Oriba. And under a flow, we had to determine the best position in angle for sensitivity. And we then launched the last step of preparation of the chip using doing a passivation of the chip with albumin in order to passivate between the different spots, the surface, and then a deactivation of that function. Then we can go for sample injection. So it's either extracellular vesicle directly or eventually different molecules we need to capture on the chip. So using this approach, it gives you the possibility to have an overview of how behave the chip in terms of arrays in the millimeter square scale, and how interact the vesicles on the surface, because it's possible to follow in real time the kinetics and the level of interaction of those EVs on the chip, and to compare this specific capture to the control, the negative control that is here in green. So at the end, you have also the visualization of the response of the spot sent to a CCD camera, and then you can see that you have a big contrast between the specific and the non-specific spots. When you combine that with AFM, it allows you then, as a second step, to go for EV characterization in terms of size and metrology. So what we just developed is to a small mask enabling the chip the SPR chip to be put on this glass slide and to know where are the good spots to investigate. We launched either in air or in liquid imaging, in contact or quantitative imaging mode, and then we established a rigorous methodology in order to obtain a sufficient number of image and then of particles to have a representative view of what happens at the level of the spots and of the chip. So we determined that we needed to have at least 20 images to be collected and 300 particles counted to have a robust view of that characterization. And then after this acquisition, and we of course did data processing with the classical software from the GPK breaker system, and also with a small program of Gradient in order to use this IFM in order really to characterize a big population of extracellular vesicles. So we determined the good parameters to get it, and then we optimized those parameters in order to estimate the effective diameter based on height and width, and the good threshold to find on a rough surface in order to really count in a rigorous way the number of vesicles. So as an example, one of the figures of the paper shows EVs that were covalently grafted on a chip, on a functional chip, on a big area in order to have an idea of the coverage. And on BENC, for example, here you have EV that are immunocaptured on the gold chip that was then functionalized with thiolet and on which we grafted antibodies. And so you have the density that is really between A and B that is lower, but this is normal because we have a selectivity on the B chip, the antibody chip. And a closer view of that two previous chip. And on the last one here, you see a large extracellular vesicles that was indeed also just absorbed on the chip for another project. So if we go into closer to the IFM view of those extracellular vesicles, you have an image on the left and the tilted image on the right. And here you see the section, the profile section of it, of two of those vesicles showing this profile, 50 nanometers in 40 to 50 nanometers in height and 100, 150 until 150 in width, meaning that, and this corresponding to platelet-derived EVs injected on the system in a spare eye at 10 to the power 9, captured on a certain specific antibody. So based on that, we of course, as I told you, decided which was the threshold in order to count only vesicles and not the background coming from the rough substrate. And we determined that 8.5 nanometers was a good threshold in order to count those vesicles. Then each dot here is a particle, and you see that based on the grain diameter and the height of that grain, we managed to obtain an effective diameter of them. In blue, you have the background, and in red, the corresponding vesicles. And you see here also that the number that was counted was more than 300 on those vesicles. So based on that, we obtained an estimation of their size, of their density. What we checked also is that the drying condition, so because we fixed and we dried the sample before scanning, has no really impact on the shape and size, the distribution of those EVs. And last, we launched a Raman approach also on these EVs, because what we were interested in was to go to have a molecular profile also of the different EV subsets. So first we decided to go for Raman in an imaging mode before going to deep-enhanced Raman spectroscopy. So here we published this first result on calcium fluoride surface on which we deposited gold in that condition of laser power, wavelength, and exposure time. And what we obtained was a first profile of those EV absorbed on this calcium fluoride surface that was corresponding in terms of the position of peaks with the lipids coming also from the extracellular vesicles in that sample. So with that, it was possible then to position this Nanobionistical Platform as a sensitive platform, because we managed to detect from 10 to the power 6 eV per ml those objects, those nano objects, and in a multimodal platform, because we combine three different techniques in a label-free approach and in a single-step detection, compared to, for example, electrochemical detection, but that use different steps to achieve this sensitivity. So the perspective of this work is to increase the throughput of analysis. So as you know, RFM is not so speed, but with a high speed mode, this would be possible to increase the throughput of analysis. So this is the next step, and increasing also the spotting density on the chip, we could imagine to reach that high level of throughput. We also want to increase the sensitivity at the single EV level, and for that we want to use another SPRI machine, enabling to choose the different angles depending on the different ligands. We also want to go for tip-enhanced Raman spectroscopy, for which we already engaged few experiments, and also recover the elasticity measurement of EVs using this quantitative imaging mode approach in AFM. So yes, it was a short overview of that work. I of course acknowledge all the students contributing to this work, and at the moment, especially Getika Rezada, who is a PhD student who did the main part of this work. Alain Rouleau, who is an engineer working on the project, the group, and my colleagues, Wilfried, Eric, and Benjamin, involved in that work, and of course the collaborators providing us the different really important samples, EV samples, and also facilities for Raman spectroscopy at the moment. And you for your attention. You are muted, Zurich.
Pancho, would you like to discuss the questions? So we have, I guess, 2 questions already came up. So would you like to discuss the questions?
Sure. We can get to that now. We are in the Q&A section. Cool. I think let me just repeat the first question. So the sample should be in thin film from AFM measurement, or PET can be used, and the sample criteria. I think in general, it depends on the size, I think, of the pellet, as well as the aspect ratio. If you want to image like particle style samples, the first thing is to immobilize it on the sample surface. For example, if you want to ensure like the background is clear, you can utilize some the standard way to do it will be some mica, so that you can sort of like get a clear background, not to be confused with the pellet you are trying to measure. And then once you have a clear background, you want to make sure like those aspect ratios of the pellet, when they are condensed together, they can be separated. So meaning the number of particles. So if it's like many of them and then they are overlapping or very close up to each other, then you might not be able to get imaging of a full sample, a full pellet. But if they are separated, then it's more likely for you to be able to resolve a single one. All depends on the application, what type of image you need, and then are you trying to do the statistical characterization or trying to get a close-up view of a single pellet to see its surface morphology. And in general, I think for aspect ratio, AFM can, we know like the tip has a geometry and a radius. So it all depends on whether your pellet is super high, and if it's congested together, that will be very hard to resolve like the size. This is the same for other cases where, for example, you have deep trenches. The probe tip geometry simply won't go into that much deep, because it's usually either spherical or a conic or sometimes a pyramid shape. So it has like a certain sharpness at the very free end, not only in terms of valence, but also the aspect ratio as well. So these are the main considerations, I think. I hope this addressed that question, and we can move on to the next one. Oh, thank you for the confirmation. For the second question we have is about using an AFM for imaging, sometimes called the flat surfaces instead of actual topography for a specific park system model. So is there a good option to change the set point or any scan value? So I think this actually depends on the application. I haven't used this specific model in the lab because I'm customizing a lot of the AFM myself and building it on my own. But some general comments I can make is the problem I encountered when I see like a non-true topography. The first thing, since I work with some 2D materials a lot, first of all, would be if you're working with really thin sample, then the background removal will be very important. The sample tilt can easily cloud the judgment of contrast. For example, I'm looking at the graphene, which is 0.35 nanometer thickness. And then if you're looking at the monolayer, then if you have a sample tilt, then the contrast of that monolayer will be easily embedded into the entire tilt when you see the actual image. So when this thing happens, you want to remove it by some post-processing algorithm. This will not only include the tilt removal, but also some fitting due to scalar nonlinearity. And then there is also like this, I'm not sure which mode you're operating in, but for example, if you're using a dynamic mode, then if you're operating at a relatively high imaging line scan speed, then easily you can see the parachuting effect, meaning you have the drop of a topography, but your oscillation of the cantilever does not have sufficient time to recover from that. And then you will get a very near version of the sample topography drop, and then you probably will not see that feature. Which we can later interpret as, oh, this is being flat, not correct. The third thing I have encountered before is, for example, dynamic modes operation when you are operating at a false resonance. Sometimes this happens with piezoacoustic actuation. So you are trying to do a sweep, but your probe installation is not very well, and then you are identifying the resonance instead of cantilever, but the structure resonance of the holder. Then it becomes a problem because your cantilever is essentially oscillating at a very small amplitude. And it's essentially the main base of it that's moving that you're thinking it might be the corresponding resonance. This can cause your image to become like a non-true. I mean, it's a flat thing, you cannot really see much. Other cases I've encountered, one more thing I can bring up specific to a sample is if you have some sample that has some accumulation of charges, and then the electrostatic force will become a problem. So you are essentially, the probe is not feeding the sample topography itself, but some electrostatic charge. So you probably want to like get a conducting path to your sample to guide those electrostatic charges out, and also potentially get some ion fans so that this problem can be resolved in a more efficient manner. Yeah, so these are what I can think of on top of my head regarding different cases where I see those strange non-topography situations. But obviously it will be different if you are having different applications. This is more like dependent on the specific area of application. Okay, cool. So these are the answers to the questions. Let's see. Oh, we have new questions. Let's see. There's a question mark. So how does face image come about in tapping mode imaging? So yeah, so basically tapping, or we say dynamic mode, there are many different basic modes, right? You can use amplitude modulation, phase modulation, frequency modulation, or depending on which application you are using for. If you're using phase images, then most likely you're operating in amplitude controlled modulation, and you are using the phase images as contrast. So basically, the phase image come out from the locking amplifier information. So you have the locking amplifier extracting both the amplitude and the phase. Right? The amplitude is being regulated by your controller to control the probe sample interaction distance, and then the topography can be imaged directly. But the phase can reveal information about the topography, like a very the material property variation, a different kind of like a stiffness, damping coefficient on the sample will appear usually qualitatively in the phase. You can see someone trying to derive those analytical expression for some phase relation to energy dissipation into your sample, but still in real life, you're getting more like qualitative information rather than quantitative. So this is like the situation for phase imaging. But obviously, this can be a very helpful tool for you to resolve or get contrast images, so that you can see, okay, this area of the sample is obviously different from the other area, and then you can make use of that information for research or like a verification of some hypothesis purpose. Okay, cool. I think these are all the question marks I see. Yeah.
Thanks, Pangzo. So I guess we have this many questions for now, but this is just the beginning of the conversation, I believe, and let the conversation go on. And to the attendees, if you have any further questions, don't hesitate to get back to Pangzo or Celine, and they will definitely be happy to answer any questions that you might have, or for any possible collaborations also. So you'll be definitely provided the email IDs of both Fanzo as well as Celine right after the webinar is over. And feel free to reach out to them if you have any further questions. So let the conversation go on. So this basically brings us to the end of today's webinar. It was great. It was a great discussion on how we can utilize the power of AFM to characterize various materials, including biological materials rather. So yeah, so a big round of applause to our today's speakers, Fanzo as well as Celine, for the wonderful presentation and for enlightening us with the power of AFM, what AFM can do and what are the limitations of the AFM. That's really great. And another big round of applause to all the attendees of today's webinar for taking out some time from the busy schedule to attend the webinar today, and also for participating in the short quiz. It was really an interesting response we have received from you all. Thank you very much. And we'll definitely announce the webinars, announce the winners of the quiz in today's webinar in the coming weeks via email. So stay tuned regarding that. And so last and finally, not the least, I would like to request all the attendees of today's webinar to please go and visit Fanzo's methods collection and enjoy the beautiful video articles published in that particular methods collection. And if you have any suggestions or any questions or feedback, feel free to get back to us at any point of time, and we'll be more than happy to take any questions that you might have. So right after the webinar, you'll be receiving a short online survey form, and we would much appreciate it if you could please take out some time and fill up the short survey form. That would be of great help to us for organizing future webinars. Thank you very much once again, and definitely you will be receiving the live recording of this webinar after the webinar is over. So, yep, thank you once again. Thanks to all the speakers once again for the wonderful presentation, and it was a great discussion, and all the attendees. Thank you once again, and have a great time ahead.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening or day.